Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Vezot haberakhah. We're going to talk about the blessings with which Moshe blessed all the tribes, and in particular, we're going to talk about blessings that show that Mashiach has already come once. In other words, we're going to talk about proof that Yeshua is the Mashiach right here in the book of Devarim or Deuteronomy. And one of the reasons that most people never see this is they're not aware of the movements of the tribes in these end times, so they don't see the blessings and the things that are implied in the prophecies. So we're going to jump right in. We're coming here to Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 33, starting in verse 1. It says, Vezot haberakhah. Now this is the blessing which with Moshe, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, Yahweh came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of his set-apart ones. From his right hand came a fiery Torah for them, and that's part of the blessing. And you say, if it's a blessing, why is it fiery? It's so we won't forget to obey it. It's not, he didn't give us a fiery Torah because he hates us. Verse 3 says, he loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down at your feet. Everyone receives your words. Verse 4 says, Moshe commanded a Torah for us, a heritage for the congregation of Jacob. Now, Jacob can refer to the house of Judah, but here in this context, it's referring to both houses, all 12 tribes. And we've spoken about this before, but since we're right here in the context, let's take a look at where Brother Judah goes with this. Brother Judah just wipes out Joseph. Joseph is no more. Joseph is all Gentiles now. So this is why Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin 59a, or the front side of the 59th page of the 59th leaf, Rabbi Yohanan says, a Gentile, meaning Joseph, who engages in Torah study is liable to receive the death penalty. As it is stated, Moses commanded us a law, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, again, which they interpret to mean only Judah, indicating its inheritance for only Judah and not for Joseph also. And then there's a big discussion in the Talmud, and so the Gemara, which is commentary on the Mishnah, answers that there in the Baraita, they give a reference. The reference is that to a Gentile who engages in the study of their 7 mitzvot, in other words, the so-called 7 Noahide laws. And it says, it's a mitzvah for a Gentile, meaning Joseph, to study the halachot that pertain to the 7 Noahide mitzvot. And when he does so, he is highly regarded. So that means that when Joseph forgets that he's Joseph, and he pretends that he's just a Gentile and ignores Yahweh's words in the Torah, then Judah will think very highly of him. Well, it should be plain to anyone who reads the prophecies that Judah's take on things is completely backwards according to the word of Yahweh. For example, we come to Yeshayahu or Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 3. And here it says, many Gentile people shall come up to Jerusalem and say, come, let's go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the Elohim of Yaakov. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth not the Talmud, but the Torah, and the word of Yahweh, not the words of men, from Jerusalem. Well, so verse 7, now we're going to talk about Judah. It says, hear Yahweh, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies. Absolutely, amen. May Yahweh please be a help against Judah's enemies. May Judah please understand that Joseph is not Judah's enemies. Okay, but I just want to bring this out. I just want to show just how sufficient Judah's hands are for him. So we saw this slide before. Just take a look at all the good kingdom works that Brother Judah is doing. He's busy organizing societies and secret societies and not so secret societies. He's organizing international congresses, Because of this, he's formed a stick of Judah. Because of this, he has a country. Because of this, he has a physical government, a physical military, and he's taking other kingdom initiatives such as the Genesis 35 Alliance and the Abraham Accords. And because he's organized, Judah is unified. Judah has a unified body and all of the good things that come from that. We'll come back to that. Verse 8, Levi is a great tribe, chosen to be the tribe of the Levitical priesthood. But why were they chosen to be the tribe of the Levitical priesthood? Verse 8, and of Levi, he said, let your Tumim and your Urim, which are the oracles, be with your set apart one, meaning leave them with Yahweh. Okay, don't be taking them into the Chaldeans. Okay, we don't need Babylonian oracles. We need the oracles of Yahweh. And you were chosen, but you also tested Yahweh at Massah, and you contended with him at the waters of Meribah. Okay, so none of us are perfect. You're a great tribe, but you've got to stay true to your original mission and your original calling. Verse 9, who says of his father and mother, I have not seen them, nor did he acknowledge his brothers or know his own children. I believe this is probably a reference to the incident of the golden calf when Judah stood up for Yahweh. Judah didn't put his own flesh and blood before Yahweh. This is just like circumcision. You're not going to put your own flesh and blood before you put obedience to Yahweh. First comes obedience to Yahweh, then you can be concerned for your own flesh and blood. And this is precisely what Levi did. He didn't heed his father and mother. He didn't acknowledge his brothers or his own children, but he observed Yahweh's word and kept Yahweh's covenant in that day. Okay, Levi brother, we love you, but what happened? Okay, you were chosen for your faithfulness, so you should be staying faithful. Where has that gone? Why now do you have a focus on Talmud? Why do you have a focus on Zohar? Why do you have a focus on Kabbalah? Verse 10 says, they shall teach Yaakov your judgments, meaning Yahweh's judgments, and teach Israel your Torah, meaning Yahweh's Torah, not your own Torah, not your own Talmud. And if they do that, they shall put incense before you and a whole burnt sacrifice on your altar. But brothers, the problem is, if we want our works to be accepted, we have to do things Yahweh's way. Well, here, verse 11 says, bless his substance, Yahweh, and accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise against him and of those who hate him, that they rise not again. But brother, how are you going to do that? How are you going to receive that blessing if you're not obeying Elohim's words? You're not teaching his Torah. You're not teaching his commandments. How's that going to work? So we know that Brother Levi doesn't like to study the end time prophecies, but really should, because we take a look at Malachi chapter 3, starting in verse 2, and this is the end time context. It says, but who can endure the day of Yahweh's coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he's like a refiner's fire and like launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi, of what, besides Talmud, and purge them as gold and silver. Of what, besides their man-made works, that they may offer to Yahweh an offering in righteousness. And righteousness means keeping the commandments of Yahweh. So look at the context here. In these end times, Yahweh's going to purify the sons of Levi, purge them as gold and silver. And what they do is they get them so hot they literally melt, and all the impurities rise to the surface, and they scrape the impurities off. Doesn't feel real good, but that's what you have to do so you can offer an offering to Yahweh in righteousness, meaning in Yahweh's commandments. So what do the sons of Levi have to do except get rid of their own man-made commandments so that then they can offer an offering to Yahweh in his commandments? Verse 4, That's when the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasant to Yahweh again, as in the days of old, as in former years, back when Levi used to still do things Yahweh's way. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the blessings that Moshe gave over the tribes, particularly in these end times, then we need to know a little something about the migrations of the tribes. Now, I've always wanted to do a full study on this. We just don't have time. We talk about this a little bit in the Nazarene Israel study, but there were many prophecies and many promises that were given to the patriarchs, specifically to Abraham, Yitzhak, some, and also Yaakov, that their seed, their children, would become merged with every family, every nation, every clan, and that their genetics would become part of every tribe, every tongue, and every people. And this would be done so that their descendants would one day be heir to the promise of salvation in Messiah Yeshua, should they then choose to accept that promise in Messiah Yeshua. And it's not a very difficult concept, but there's a lot of people who always like to get upset when we talk about the migrations of the tribes. Just one thing to remember, Yahweh always chooses to work with the least. So if Yahweh has chosen to work with you, it's nothing to get prideful over. But what we see here is simply the promise that Abraham and also Israel's seed would become scattered and become part of every family, every nation, and every clan in all the earth. Okay, and let me just throw a couple of tidbits in here for those who are ready for them, and then we'll unpack them in 2 weeks from now in Parashat Noach. But one of the things that we see is that when the 10 or the lost 12 tribes were taken out of the land, they ended up getting tied to Japheth or Japheth. So Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the name Japheth means expansion or expansive. So we come here, we take a look at the root. It's Strong's Hebrew Concordance 6601 is patah. It means to open or to make roomy, to enlarge, to make something bigger. So this was the function of tying the movement to the Japhethites, to white European peoples, was simply to expand it. And then the other tribes have other functions. But this slide talks about the mechanics of how it happened. So our forefathers were taken out of the land of Israel and deposited in the Assyrian Empire. Eventually, Assyria broke up. So when Assyria broke up, it was a process, but with the rise and fall of empires over the years, the characteristics that describe the tribes ended up migrating north and west to the lands that later became Protestant Northwestern Europe. And so again, the people went all 4 directions, went every which way. But as prophetic bodies, the characteristics of the people migrated north and west. We talk about that more in the Nazarene Israel study. And then in the end of days, it's just like it says in Parashat Nitzavim, in Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 30. In the end of days, Yahweh will call us from the farthest parts of the heavens to come back to the land of Israel after Armageddon. But in the meantime, we're still supposed to be working the Great Commission. We don't have time to unpack it more than that. If you want to know more, there's a few resources I can recommend to you. I don't agree with everything. Yair Davidi, he's an Orthodox Jewish man. He will take your faith in Yeshua, so don't let him. But he has a book called The Tribes, the Israelite Origins of Western Peoples. That's sort of his best of compilation. I also have never read this book, but it gets good reviews. The Lost 10 Tribes of Israel Found by Stephen Collins. A lot of people have cited that one. There's other resources, White, and then you have Raymond Capt. There's a number of other authors as well. But basically what they all agree upon is that your Anglo people are effectively the house of Joseph. So here you have, in the famous blessing with Israel crossing his hands, taking the right hand, putting it on Ephraim's head, even though Ephraim was the younger, the left hand on Manasseh's head, even though he was the older. And he prophesied that Ephraim would become the greater of the two, even though he was the younger of the two. Okay, so notice what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Anglo lands. Okay, so we're not talking about just Ephraim, which would be the United States, or Manasseh, which is the other UK territories, but he's speaking of both in this context. He says, and of Joseph, he said. Now, notice also a thing to bear in mind, Joseph has been exiled from the land of Israel at this point, and yet still Yahweh is going to speak through Moshe about the lands that Joseph is prophesied to occupy during this time. So it says, and of Joseph, he said, blessed of Yahweh is his land, with the precious things of heaven, with the dew, and the deep lying beneath, just all the good things, with the precious fruits of the sun, the precious produce of the months, just some very bountifully blessed lands. Verse 15, with the best things of the ancient mountains, with the precious things of the everlasting hills, with the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the bush. Let the blessing come on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. In Judaism, you talk about Nachmanides patterns. In Christianity, you talk about prophetic shadow pictures, but this is what is being discussed. So Joseph was sent ahead of his brothers to preserve life by means of a great deliverance. And in just the same way, this is what was happening with Yeshua in Yohanan or John chapter 7 and verse 35. Then the rabbinic leaders of the Jews said among themselves, where does Yeshua intend to go that we shall not find him? Does he intend to go into the dispersion among the Greeks and to teach the Greeks? And that's exactly what Yeshua was planning to do. He's planning to go into the dispersion outside the land of Israel to bring back that which was lost. So even in the dispersion, Joseph would be recognizable by certain characteristics. So verse 17, it says, Joseph's glory is like a firstborn bull, and his horns are like the horns of the wild ox. I believe King James says unicorn, but if you look that up, it's the re'im, and that's a picture of it in the backdrop. It's an ancient giant ox. Together with them, he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. Obviously, that's a military reference. But we take this analogy of the bull. So here, go to Wikipedia or any other source. Type for John Bull. It's the national personification of England, just like Uncle Sam might be considered a national personification for the United States. And the English army had the reputation of pushing their way around the world until they were able to establish an empire upon which the sun never set, fulfilling the prophecies. We could compare for the United States, the 26th president was Theodore Roosevelt. He had sayings about how the White House was a bully pulpit, and his saying was bully. And then we would take the Panama Canal, and you could compare it Gaza, but we'll just leave it there. The point that we're trying to make here is we're talking about the house of Joseph here, and it fits the characteristics of the house of Ephraim and the house of Manasseh. Now, there's a lot going on here, particularly when you talk about the land of Ephraim or the land of the United States of America, because as we saw in the last chapter of the Revelation study, it's also the land of Babylon. There's a lot going on here. In an earlier study, we saw this. You can also find this in the Revelation study. This is what we call Team West. So you have Mystery Babylon. There's Team East and Team West. Well, Team West, you have Rome is the spiritual root or the spiritual capital. Then you have the inner city of London, run by Zerah, which is the financial capital of Asav. And then you have Washington, D.C., which is the military capital of Asav. So it's very interesting, not in the land of Israel, but outside the land of Israel, Joseph has prophesied lands. There's also Ephraim has a prophesied land, and it fulfills multiple roles. So all things to be aware of. And again, we're supposed to leave the land of Babylon. So if you're in the United States, please keep that in prayer. Now it's interesting. It's going to get much more interesting here. So Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10, it says, now the scepter, which is the right to rule, okay, that's the kingship, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. Now, a lawgiver, that's the one who sets the halakha. Now, a lawgiver shall not pass from between Judah's feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Now, Judah reads the him with a small h, so Judah reads that to Judah shall be the obedience of the people. Most Nazarene read it until Shiloh comes, and to him with a capital H, meaning the obedience of the people is going to be to Shiloh. Okay, but now notice something. Okay, so Judah's got, in verse 10, they've got the scepter, the kingship. They've also got the lawgiver, which is a kind of priesthood, because it's the one who's qualified to set the halakha. Now notice it's going to get thick here. Let's come to now verse 20 in Devarim 33. It says, and of the tribe of Gad, Gad was a military tribe, he said, blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells as a lion and shall tear off the arm, also the crown. He provided the first part for himself because there the portion of the lawgiver was hidden. Okay, so Judah had the portion of the lawgiver. Now Gad has a portion of the lawgiver that's hidden in Gad. It says he came with the heads of the people, the right rulings of Yahweh he did, and his judgments with Israel, so indicating sort of a leadership status right there in the end of the passage, and then the verse there. So we look this up. It's Strong's Hebrew Concordance 2710 is hakak. So it's a primitive root meaning to hack. So hakak, to hack. In other words, to engrave or to serve the function of a scribe. Because what does a scribe do? Someone hears a ruling and the scribe hacks it into stone or into metal. Okay. By implication, to enact a law, because laws or rulings were cut into stone or hacked, chiseled into stone or metal tablets in primitive times. Okay, so then talks about the uses of that word. It can mean to be a governor. It can also mean to be a lawgiver. Okay, so we take a look here. We come to Brown Driver Briggs just to get a little more clarification. Get basically the same reading. It's hakak is to inscribe, to enact, or decree. It also refers to the one who decrees or to the lawgiver. And the way this works in Scripture, hopefully we'll get the study up for you there, but the way this is supposed to work in Scripture is that someone like Moshe or Shemuel or Eliyahu, or Yaakov Hatzadik, their job is to hear Yahweh's voice and to speak according to it. And then hopefully also with regards to Scripture and prophecy. But that's the job, that's the primary job of someone who is a hokek, the portion of the lawgiver, is that they hear from Yahweh and then speak or hack according to it. In other words, it's a prophetic role. Okay, so let's just tuck that away and keep on going. Now, here's what Brother Judah says about this. I wrote some Jewish brothers and they couldn't see it. So we're gonna point this out here. So Art Scroll Stone Edition Humash, page 1119, referring to Devarim 33 and verse 21. It says, for there the portion of the lawgiver is hidden. So Chelkat Behokek Safun. Okay, so, and what Judah says is that Gad chose their territory because they knew that Moshe would be interred there, he'd be buried there in a hidden grave. Okay, see Deuteronomy 34 and verse 6, especially commentary by Rashi. Okay, that's not what Scripture says at all. Okay, so here we saw this in Parashat Matot Maseh. So we come to Bamidbar, or Numbers 32, so a book ago. Now the children of Reuven and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock. And when they saw that the land of Yezer and the land of Gilead that indeed the region was a place for livestock, the children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spoke to Moshe, to Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, the country which Yahweh defeated before the congregation of Israel is a good land for livestock, and your servants have plenty of livestock. Therefore, they said, if we found favor in your sight, if you like us, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Don't take us over the Jordan. Let us inherit on this side. There'll be more for us and there'll be more for everyone else on that side of the Jordan. So everyone will come out the victor. We'll go over ahead. We'll act as shock troops. Everything will work out. Okay, so just to review from Parashat Matot Maseh, our forefathers struck a rod. We came around Moab, so we bypassed Moab. Then we came up into the Amorite country, which is in green. We struck the Amorites. That was given to Reuven. Then we came north and struck Bashan, and then doubled back to camp at Abel Shittim or Acacia Grove. Okay, but what we're going to see here is that Moshe's burial place is in this green sector. It's in the area that was given to Reuven, not the area that's given to Gad. Okay, so here we come to BibleMapper.org. And the thing to notice is that Mount Nebo, so if you come from the northern tip of the Dead Sea and just come straight across to the east, then you have to drop down some. So Mount Nebo is a little bit to the south of the northern tip of the Dead Sea. And Mount Nebo, that's where Moshe was buried in Reuven's territory. So here we come. Same thing, Wikipedia, 12 tribes of Israel. Once again, Mount Nebo is down just a little bit from the northern tip of the Red Sea, comfortably in Reuven's territory. Okay, now here's the Art Scroll Tanakh. Now this is the version that they use in the American Yeshivot. So if there's any discrepancy, it should show up here. So you've got the Art Scroll Stone Edition Tanakh, page 2045, Appendix D, map 1, and it shows once again Mount Nebo is in Reuven's territory. Okay, so now we have map number 2, same thing, Reuven's territory. Okay, so what do we do with this rabbinic assertion that the portion of the lawgiver with reference to Gad is simply talking about Moshe's burial plot? Okay, and it's in the wrong tribe. It's in Reuven's territory anyway. But what do we do with that? Okay, well, let's keep reading. Okay, let's look it up here. So we look at Rashi's commentary on Devarim 34 and verse 6. And it says, Moshe was buried opposite Bet Peor. So Moshe's grave was prepared there ever since the 6 days of creation to atone for the incident regarding Baal Peor in Numbers 25. Really? It says this Moshe's grave was one of the things that were created between the twilights on the eve of the Shabbat in the week of the creation. Really? So how does Moshe's grave being prepared since day 6, how does that atone for the incident regarding Baal Peor? It's like, what sense does this make? Does this have any correspondence at all to the Tanakh, or is this just another rabbinic fiction? Okay, this is a rabbinic invention. It has nothing to do with the main point. It just serves to lead everyone off the trail. So let's take a look again. Verse 21, just to refresh, it says that Gad provided the first part for himself because he needs it, because there the portion of the lawgiver was hidden. So it's just like the birthright and the blessing. If you're going to have the birthright, you need the blessing. Okay, if you're going to have the portion of the lawgiver, you need to provide the first part for yourself because you're going to need it to do everything that you need to do. Okay, and with that portion of the lawgiver, that's how Gad would come with the heads of the people. That's how he would do the right rulings of Yahweh and his judgments with Israel. So the rabbinic interpretation doesn't work. We could also mention it's a completely different reading. So in Gad, the portion of the lawgiver is supposed to be a burial plot. And in Genesis, with regard to Judah, the portion of the lawgiver is supposed to be the portion of the lawgiver. Okay, but let's just take a look. So the right to rule, the scepter, the kingship shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver, the ability to set halakah, or the right or the duty to set halakah, from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. People say, well, who is Shiloh? Well, Shiloh, it's Strong's Hebrew 7886. It's just an epithet of Mashiach. It means tranquil. So he will have a certain tranquility about him. But when we take a look, it's just simply talking about how the portion of the lawgiver went from the house of Judah to the house of Joseph at the time of Yeshua's arrival. So it says, the scepter, the kingship, shall not depart from Judah, nor lawgiver, the ability to set halakah, from between his feet, until Shiloh, Mashiach Nagid, Yeshua comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So what that means, very simply, is that Judah started with the portion of the lawgiver. Mashiach showed up, and the portion of the lawgiver was hidden in Gad. And there's a lot more to the story than that. If you want to know more, I encourage you to check our study on the website. Blessed is he who enlarges Gad. But we know that this took place in the first century, because as we've already seen, Daniel 9 and verse 25 tells us that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, there would be 69 weeks until Mashiach Nagid, or Shiloh, would appear. So we take the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks of years, we end up with 483 years, and we add the 483 years to the time when the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem was given, and that gives us the arrival date of Mashiach. As we've already seen, there's only 3 candidates. All of them exist at the end of the Second Temple period. The first candidate was the Edict of Cyrus, given in 3221. We add the 483 years. That brings us to 3704, or around 56 BCE. No one appeared then. Wait about 19 years, and you can try again with King Darius's decree. You add the 483 years, and it comes out to about 3723, or around 37 BCE. And once again, there was no one. No one appeared then. Okay, the only viable option is that King Artashasta, or King Artaxerxes, gave his decree about 3303. 483 years later is 3786. That's when Yeshua showed up, was 26 CE, fulfilling the prophecy over Mashiach Nagid. So Shiloh came, the portion of the lawgiver was hidden in Gad. And then verse 26, after the 62 weeks, Mashiach shall be cut off, but not for himself. And that's exactly what happened. And the people of the prince who was to come, meaning the Roman general Titus, would destroy the city and the sanctuary, and that's exactly what happened in 3830 or 70 CE. And that is when the portion of the lawgiver was hidden in Gad. And as long as we're here, to be complete, we should point out that Micah 5:2 tells us that the one to be ruler in Israel, Shiloh, Mashiach Nagid, would come out of Bethlehem Ephrathah. And that's really something, because Yeshua came out of Bethlehem Ephrathah. And he came out of Bethlehem Ephrathah in the first century, prior to the close of the Second Temple period. Today, Bethlehem is almost a completely Muslim town. You couldn't get a Jewish Mashiach to come from Bethlehem because there's no Jews there. It's mostly Muslims, some Christians. There are a few settlements around the periphery, but that doesn't really qualify as coming from Bethlehem itself. And even if it did, it doesn't qualify as coming from Bethlehem in the first century at the end of the Second Temple period. So there's no way to fulfill this verse apart from Yeshua. And brothers and sisters, if we recognize that there's no way to fulfill certain verses apart from the arrival of Yeshua, that there's no way to explain the emergence, the reappearance of the house of Ephraim after all these years, except for Yeshua, then can we reconsider the daily death curse over the house of Joseph? Article 12 of the Amidah is called the Birchat Haminim. It's the blessing, actually the curse, over all forms of Nazarenes. Brothers, this is not helping our relationship, and you've known for at least 200 years who we are. When will this curse be taken down? We have a long way to go before Judah and Israel dwell together again. But as long as we stay working towards Yahweh's words, as long as we're hearing his voice, we're trying to do what's written in his word, we're going to make it. We're going to get back there. In verse 28, that's when Israel shall dwell in safety. Verse 29, that's when we shall be a people saved by Yahweh, and our enemies will submit to us, and we shall tread down their high places, is when we are obeying Yahweh's voice. That's when Yahweh shows up for us. So we come to chapter 34 and verse 4. Yahweh said to Moshe, "This is the land of which I swore to give Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, saying, I will give it to your descendants, and I have caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." So Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab, in the territory of Reuven, not Gad, according to the word of Yahweh. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Bet Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Verse 9. Now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moshe had laid his hands on him. So even though our forefathers wouldn't obey Moshe, our forefathers did obey Joshua and did as Yahweh had commanded Moshe. But since that time, there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moshe, whom Yahweh knew face to face. In all the signs and wonders which Yahweh sent him to do in the land of Egypt, before Paro, before all his servants, and in all his land, and by all that mighty power and all the great terror which Moshe performed in the sight of all Israel. And Moshe was being used to bring together the children of Israel as a nation. There were 2 camps and 12 tribes, but they were all unified as a nation. Today, we have many people everywhere. We have the house of Judah that has already formed a stick. We have another stick that is in the process of reemergence and formation. Brothers and sisters, just to remind us all, we get to go home once this stick is formed. Then we get to join the sticks one to another into one stick, and then we get to go back home to the land. The way we're going to get there is we're going to focus on Yeshua's kingdom. Judah understands the need to form a kingdom. They don't understand Yeshua's kingdom, but they're very active in forming a kingdom for their coming king. Ephraim similarly needs to be active for Yeshua, our king. We need to seek first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness. That means we need to do things the way Scripture says. We're not free to form our own unions. We're not free to form our own organizations. And that's not to say that we're not all saved. Maybe you're saved, I'm saved. We all have the Spirit, but we have different walks. That's not going to be good enough. You can't form a single stick when the people all have different walks. So, brethren, how do we get to where we all have a single walk? It's that we all need to contend earnestly for the faith, which was delivered once for all of the set-apart ones. Those who hear Yahweh's voice and do what he says will be blessed. Shabbat Shalom.